Committee meeting. We have a hearing on Senate Bill 82. We also have a presentation on data-driven workforce solutions. So we do need to move through this, give everyone their due opportunity to speak, but we are expected to be on the floor in 55 minutes. So I will start with, are there any bill introductions for Senate Education Committee? Seeing none, we will begin our hearing on Senate Bill 82. At this time, we will call on our reviser, Tamara Lawrence, to give us an overview on Senate Bill 82.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Kansas currently has a School Sports Head Injury Prevention Act that was enacted in 2011. Senate Bill 82 would amend that act to require school districts to comply with certain requirements related to concussion management and to establish policies and concussion management teams to prevent and manage concussions that might happen at school or school activities. On pages 1 and 2 of the bill, there are definitions for certain relevant terms that are used throughout the bill. And then starting at the bottom of page 2 are the requirements for schools. It includes requirements that schools establish a concussion education program, establish policies and procedures governing the prevention and management of student concussions, appoint a concussion management team to establish return to play and return to learn protocols based on scientific evidence-based practices, appoint a designee from that team to supervise compliance with these policies and procedures, and then establish a return to learn protocol. The concussion management team would include certain school personnel, and you can see those listed on page 3 of the bill. The bill would also require biennial training for certain school and activity officials that are connected with school activities. Senate Bill 82 would also require that an athlete not participate in any activity until they are completely integrated in school without accommodation related to a concussion, and that an athlete would be removed from an activity if a coach, healthcare provider, game official, athletic trainer, the athlete's parent, the athlete, or other appropriate person believes that that athlete might have sustained a concussion. The athlete would only be allowed to return to that activity upon evaluation and clearance by a healthcare provider and completion of each return to play and return to learn protocol requirements. And the bill would take effect on July 1 upon publication in the statute book, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
We will start with Senator Dietrich.
Thank you so much. Great explanation. I have a quick question. Page 4, line 10D. An athlete may not participate in any extracurricular activity, competition. That would include debate.
So the bill does define, I believe, extracurricular activity, and that definition starts on page 1 in line 32. And it means an organized school-sponsored or school-sanctioned athletic activity for students. And it includes, but is not limited to, and you can see the list at the bottom, but it lists all the sports and marching band. And then the very last sentence of that definition, though, says all interscholastic activities are deemed to be extracurricular activities.
So that, Madam Chair?
Yes.
That was a little bit of confusion for me, because under CASIA, debate would be an extracurricular activity. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
It might be considered a co-curricular, just like choir. Band is typically co-curricular, and I think that's why it's mentioned specifically. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. So we have 4 proponents that are here to speak in person, and I have a neutral proponent. So what we will do is each of you will be allowed 4 minutes to speak so that we have what you have to say, and please do not read from your letter. We have your testimony that you have submitted. So share with us what you have to say on this. This will allow us time to ask questions. So we will start with Mark Padfield. He's a teacher and athletic trainer for Tonganoxie High School. Mark, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And our timekeeper will raise her hand when you have a minute left.
I'm not going to fill 4 minutes.
All right, there we go.
I'm really here just today to try to address any questions you might have. I'm in a unique position in Tonganoxie. I'm one of the old guard. I've been in
Let's turn the mic on. Push that
it
button.
is on. I'll address it up. Is that
There we
better?
go.
Okay, sorry. You'd think I'd have a better teacher voice. I have been in Tonganoxie for, 18 years now. So I'm in a unique position where I don't have many people questioning me when I say, hey, we need to take care of Steve on these tests. We need to give him a little extra time. Unfortunately, a lot of schools are not afforded that same level of protection. This is designed to be a no-cost educational piece to help protect our student athletes in the classroom and make sure that academically they're protected as well as athletically. So I don't know that I necessarily need to preach to the choir here, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. And what we'll do is we'll have the proponents speak and the neutral testimony, and then we'll ask questions.
Sounds good.
Okay. So next up, we have Rich Baumgardner, Program Director of Athletic Training for Wichita State University.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today, Rich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. Can everybody hear me okay? From my point of view, and what we've done with Kansas Athletic Training Society is there's been a lot of new research come up in the last 12 years since this original act has been approved to move forward with, particularly in the lines of return to learn and return to school. Return to learn and return to school are two kind of different entities. So the return to school piece is actually the school environment. So it's the noise, it's the transition of class periods, it's the lighting and those things. Return to learn is actually the component of the education model itself. It's the comprehension, it's the knowledge, and it's a learning cycle. So the essence across the board research-wise with return to learn is to return the student back to the same level of comprehension as they were prior to injury. And that's kind of the same model as a return to play, is return to play person back to the level of competition prior to injury. As far as the things within the bill, that's really kind of based on the research that has come out. There's been research come out with the CDC back in 2018. There's a concussion sport group, which is really a world-type group that meets about every 5 years that develops what's called a SCAT tool, which is a sport concussion assessment tool in which we as athletic trainers and physicians and other entities use to assess a concussion initially as well as post-concussion, and those things do have return to learn elements on them. And so the research is starting to become more apparent in the fact that it's not just a return to play model. We really need to understand the comprehension and learning of the student athlete, as well as any person who sustains concussion that's returning to school. In regards to education, the CDC and the concussion sport group and other entities do support educating teachers, school personnel, parents, students, healthcare providers, et cetera, on concussion dynamics and how they do affect the learning cycle. So I'm here for support in regards to that the return to learn piece is really critical for students if they're going to move forward with their education. And I think the last thing we want to see is a student continue to struggle academically in a learning environment, and we don't have proper supports and we don't have proper safeguards for that student within the school system so that we can make sure that they're back on track within the learning cycle. So I'll entertain any questions as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Susie Turney. She's the Executive Director of the Kansas Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. Thank you so much for being here today. And why don't you introduce some of or at least acknowledge the folks that are here watching you.
Sure. Okay. Very good. Well, good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to have all of these wonderful members of our association here. Today happens to be our organization's annual legislative day for the KSHA, the Kansas Speech Language Hearing Association. So perfect timing. We're all here and love to be here and show our members how the legislative process works, and so see a bill actually come to a hearing. So it's wonderful. Well, thank you all for allowing me to speak this morning. I'm Susie Turnus, the Executive Director of CASHA. I'm an audiologist by training, but I represent speech-language pathologists and audiologists from across the state. And we're here really to speak in support of this bill. Speech-language pathologists have a valuable role to play in concussion management. When a student is concussed, they can have deficits in speech and language. They can have deficits in other cognitive areas, working memory, attention, lots of things like that SLPs are uniquely qualified to assess. So when I had the opportunity to work with the Kansas Athletic Trainers Society in supporting this bill, we started talking more, and we would like to be added to the concussion management team. And I've spoken with their group, and that they're in support of that as well. We're not currently listed in that group, so we'll work with their lobbyists after today's hearing to get that verbiage added. But SLPs do have a valuable role to play. In addition, audiologists have a piece to play too. They don't necessarily need to be part of the team, but the students can have vestibular deficits and balance issues after concussions, and audiologists are well trained to assess and treat those as well. So just here to support our students and to provide safety for our students who have had concussions, particularly pertaining to the return to learn protocol. So I thank you all and ready to stand for questions.
Thank you so much. Last up, as far as proponents that are here in person, we have Dr. George C. Phillips, MD, from the Kansas chapter of American Academy of Pediatrics. Dr. Phillips, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is George Phillips. I'm a pediatrician from Overland Park, and I am glad to represent the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is an organization of more than 450 pediatricians across the state. We think there are several strengths to Senate Bill 82, which include its emphasis on prevention, the highlighting of return-to-learn protocols, and most importantly for us, the cooperation amongst medical, athletic, and educational professionals. In my 25-year career, we've seen a lot of improvements in concussion management with improvements in equipment or attention to playing environments or different techniques used in sport. But what we know now is that what is critical to concussion prevention is helping individuals better understand what a concussion actually is and how we educate everyone to recognize those symptoms earlier. And this bill nicely calls for education that applies not just to the athletes, but their parents and across the entire range of school personnel for all of those professionals who will have day-to-day contact with the athlete during their management and recovery. We've always emphasized a return to play, but we now know that safe return to learn policies are just as important and perhaps even more important for the long-term goals and successes of most of our high school athletes. CASHA data shows that more than 1/3 of athletes who are concussed during their sport require academic modifications, and as pediatricians, we welcome the opportunity to partner with these school-based concussion management teams to support return to learn plans. Finally, this bill really highlights the importance of a combination of medical management, return to play, and return to learn criteria. This bill highlights that you need clearance in all three of those domains to safely and effectively return the student into all those different domains in order to be fully integrated back into all of their activities. So given this great potential for benefit for the patients that we serve across the state, we're happy to support Senate Bill 82 and would be happy to help answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, committee, what questions do you have for our proponents? Yep, we'll call on Senator O'Shea first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question might be for our last speaker, Dr. Thank you, Phillips. Tell me more about how do you see this being implemented? So if we pass this, then we've got to get the schools on board and get the right stakeholders. And I like that the bill allows for some flexibility on who that is, but how do you see this practically rolling out?
One of the challenges that I think we currently experience as clinicians when we have concussed athletes is when you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. And so each athlete needs an individual approach to how they get back to their sport and how they get back into the classroom. And that varies depending on which school our athlete happens to attend. And we have some schools where we know there's a fantastic contact point that we can turn to. And then we know we have some schools where the resources are limited. So what we love in the framework of this bill is that it helps the school look at what their current resources are, identify the professionals across disciplines that they can pull together into an interdisciplinary team, have one key point person who's responsible for administering the protocols as that athlete works through their plan. And that's a wonderful potential as a contact person for a pediatrician to be able to communicate information, receive information back, and make sure that athlete is ready to progress back to the classroom and the athletic field.
Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is for any of the proponents. Is there any specific case or things that have happened in the past that have led to the development of this bill? Like, can you give specific examples of how school districts or schools have failed to assist these students in getting back into their schoolwork or activities?
I'll field that question.
I need you to identify yourself first.
Rich Baumgartner. I don't know if there's a specific case that you can actually draw from. I think what we've drawn from is the research that shows that there's an overwhelming lack of communication or lack of consistency with policy or lack of training, certain areas of training, particularly concussion management training across the board. And I'm not going to say every school's like that. We work with schools that have tremendous amounts of support and teamwork and networks, and then there are some schools that unfortunately don't have the resources. And going back to what Doc said over here about once you've seen one concussion, you've seen them all. I think sometimes without the training and the communication is the big thing, then people will just take it off as comparing one to the other instead of individualizing what a dynamic plan should be for a particular student. So there really isn't just one sort of case that would bring this about.
You may follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern is this training or process, is this going to be mandated on smaller school districts and smaller schools that, like you mentioned, may not have the resources? And who is going to fund this training and who is required to have the training?
Well, I can probably turn some of that over to other people who are more aligned to answer that type of question. I think some of them are we haven't really delved into the fact of who's going to actually do it. I think that's something that we'd have to kind of work with, but in regards to the actual training component, whatever it is when we're written inside the biannual training, I think that's going to be the main focus of it. But as far as like how the implementation is going to be, I think we're still kind of working through some of them steps.
Thank you.
Other questions? You may. Please identify yourself.
Mark Padfield. From an educational side, we're not looking to add any personnel. We're using the personnel that's already there. So teachers, counselors, school nurse, athletic trainers, speech language paths. I mean, the list is there. I don't need to read it to you. But the idea is that there will be educational pieces available. The CDC heads up, has some great information out there. CATS is planning on partnering with ks.gov to develop some educational videos, and they can be presented to the schools. So ultimately it'll be up to the schools to decide how it best fits their situation, and their education within the training isn't going to be mandated so much as just encouraged, and here's some opportunities for you. Thank you.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you. My question probably goes a little bit along with that because I see the bill does state that counselor, nurse, or athletic trainer would be considered part of that team, but we probably have some schools that don't have those positions. So that was my concern, that it is specified in here, from what I can tell, in the bill, but we may have areas where that is not applicable. So then that also then goes to the question then, is this more of a local school board issue? Because there are differences from district to district as far as who's employed and what type of positions we have there. And I will say, as the parent of somebody who has had a concussion, I had a lot of communication and a lot of information coming out. So like I said, maybe that's more of my question. Is this more of a local school board issue as far as potentially what's happening in different districts? And then also take into consideration, some districts may not have this personnel that's listed in the bill.
Hadfield again. The list isn't intended to be an end-all be-all. It's a selection from the list. So it, I believe it says, let me find the line, I'm sorry. The membership of the concussion management team shall include to the extent possible, but shall not be limited to, and then it lists the individuals. So if you don't have an athletic trainer, at least we'll have a team put together of, you know, a teacher, a classroom teacher, the school counselor that can kind of make sure that we're taking these temporary accommodations, basically is what they are, into account for the students.
And maybe this is more of a revisor question, but doesn't shall actually suggest that it is supposed to be versus may?
Yeah, so typically shall is a directory term directing them to do that. But as the gentleman just said, it says shall include to the extent possible.
So Dr. Turnus, is this possible that this could be from the standpoint of the speech language pathologist, could be done through telemedicine?
Yes, I think this could be done through telemedicine. A lot of districts, maybe they don't have a speech path in that building, but might work somewhere in the district or within a special ed co-op. So would you agree, for those of you, we have some people who do concussion management at Fort Hays State already. They already have a program in place for their athletes. Could this be done remotely, the concussion evaluation piece?
I believe. I'm still learning a little bit about their new technology.
Okay. So maybe. Short answer, maybe. But also, I think to answer your question about the language, my interpretation is to the extent possible would indicate if you have that person on staff, if you have a school counselor on staff, if you have a school nurse on staff, is my understanding.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I'm not sure who can answer this question, but reading through the bill, would this put individual school districts or schools at any more liability by having a concussion management team rather than just going solely off of the healthcare provider's directive for that individual student? Is the school district assuming more liability in the situation if they are part of the decision-making process of whether that student returns back to the sport or educational activities? I don't know if there's anybody here that can answer that.
Dr. Phillips, can you answer that? That's why he has MD behind his.
It's always difficult when you ask a doctor to answer a lawyer question. You know, what I would say is that I think one of the real benefits in this is that, you know, in the way the bill is structured, you have to pass through all three of those elements. And so there has to be a medical clearance element, also a return to play, and a return to learn element. And I think, you know, whereas any of those three disciplines or teams could still have a reservation based upon their evaluation, what helps is that if one of us sees an issue that is maybe a bit more subtle and the other disciplines have not noticed, that's a great opportunity for communication. It somewhat belies a conservative approach, but it really emphasizes a safe approach to return for the athlete. And that's the focus that I would propose.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. My question goes along with, touches on what a couple of other committee members have said, but if this is the best protocol for helping students get back to the playing field and back in the classroom and ready to learn, is there anything preventing districts from implementing these protocols?
I'm sorry, Mark Padfield. There's currently no limitations that I'm aware of, or those around me were aware of. There are school districts that have gone a step further that have established their own return to learn protocols, but across the state, that's what our focus was to try to bring that level up to that level of the schools that are already taking that step for the return to learn themselves, just to protect students across Kansas. So to answer your question, I don't think there's anything limiting the schools. I can't imagine there would be. We're just trying to encourage them to do so.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Another, if I may, and whoever can answer this. So do we know how many students on average have concussions during a school year in Kansas? And if so, is there a particular sport or activity that tends to have the most concussions in that?
Yes, Rich Baumgartner. I don't know if there's an actual statistic on average that I'm aware of. I'm sure there is somewhere, but I don't really have that information for you. But as far as the concussions with the most, you're seeing football, soccer, wrestling, basketball are typically the more common ones that we see concussions with.
But we don't have a quantity, is that right? We don't have a guesstimation on a quantity? Okay.
George Phillips again. KSHA data from prior to the pandemic had just over 2,000 student athletes who were concussed during practice or competition for their sport. And from the pediatrician perspective, that's incredibly valuable data, but it also does not include our students who are concussed in other activities, motor vehicle crashes, other accidental injuries, et cetera, who could benefit from a school that has return to learn guidance that could be applied to their injury as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, committee, we are moving on to our neutral testimony. We have Travis Aller, Executive Director of Kansas Chiropractic Association. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to present neutral testimony on Senate Bill 82. The Kansas Chiropractic Association represents over 1,200 doctors of chiropractic and their patients in the state of Kansas. And we are supportive of Senate Bill 82 and the idea behind it. What we are asking is to amend the definition of healthcare provider to include some, but not all doctors of chiropractic. Some that have had additional training and education in the diagnosis and management of concussion. While the diagnosis and management of concussion are well within our current scope of practice, this is not an expansion of our scope of practice. We feel that for this case, it would be beneficial if we kind of punted to the Board of Healing Arts and let them choose what courses or certifications a doctor of chiropractic would be required to have in order to sign return to play and be considered a healthcare provider under this bill. And I want to offer some relief here. This, many times I seem to talk about this, you're going to hear the terms turf battle. And it's not a turf battle because it's not an expansion of scope. It's not a fight. We're not fighting over patients. We're just wanting to do what's best for the patients we currently see. And we are currently treating, diagnosing, and managing concussions in patients and in school-level athletes. So that's what we're asking for. This is nothing additional. It's just what we want, again, is the Board of Healing Arts to be able to say, okay, these courses or this certification would allow a doctor of chiropractic to be considered a healthcare provider for this statute. And I'll stand for questions at any time.
Now is the time. Committee, what questions do you have? I'm not seeing any questions. I'm assuming that the proponents see this as a friendly amendment suggestion.
It's been a while since I've talked to Mr. Bruno about it, so I didn't have a chance to reach out to him before this.
Okay.
I will.
Let's make sure that we have that conversation.
Yep.
And I'm not seeing any more questions. So committee, I want to draw your attention. You do have two pieces of proponent written-only testimony from Matt Ortman and from Leslie Thomas. We have two pieces of neutral written only from Rochelle Colombo and Scott Rothschild. So I just draw that to your attention. Yes, Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apology for being a couple minutes late. Was there a discussion regarding, I'm just thinking I'm a principal or I'm a superintendent in a school district, and they're saying, come up with this protocol. Will there be any sort of a template or anything that school districts can use?
I'm thinking, Mark, are you wanting to address that?
Mark Padfield again. Yeah, the intention is to have a basic framework established, and then that can be fleshed out by the school districts themselves. So whether that be through the CDC Heads Up website and their materials, or we're planning to partner with Acacia and establish some educational videos that can be used as well, and other materials. So it'll be presented to the schools, and they can pick and choose what they want to incorporate. Yes.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will now call the hearing on Senate Bill 82 to close. At this time, we are going to pivot, and we are going to have a presentation on data-driven workforce solutions. We have Tori Peterson, president of Aligned, is here today. And Tori, as the audience kind of clears out, nothing personal. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. There we go. Tori, we're still here.
Fantastic.
So, is the microphone on?
It is.
Okay, let's begin.
Okay. Madam Chair, thank you so much for the opportunity and the committee for being here today. My name is Tori Peterson, and I am the president and co-founder of Aligned. We are a group of business executives who focus very intentionally on making sure that business and education are aligned, and that the two systems work with each other to make sure that every one of our Kansas students are prepared. And I will try to nod at you whenever it's... Because I work with business leaders almost exclusively, and then of course the education system as our partners, I get questions on a daily basis about why and where the workforce is. And so I wanted to cover a couple of things before we get started into some of the data that we're going to talk about later. The research would tell us, sadly, that it's just all about math. The graph that I have before you here is a graph from 2001 to 2011, which shows the percentage of the working age population, so ages 15 to 64. Blue is growth and red is decline. As you will see from 2001 to 2011, we are primarily in a growth model. Fast forward 2012 to 2011, and this same slide will show mostly red, or a decline in the working age population. In the next 60 years, the decline in population for ages 15 to 64 is expected to reach unparalleled decline. Retirements, smaller family sizes, and different family structures have led to these generational size gaps. Simply put, we don't have enough workers to fill the jobs that are open. And I say all this to set the stage because we cannot afford to let our kids leave Kansas. I have a teenager and two teenagers at home right now, and states, what we've seen is that states that invest in longitudinal data are able to provide their families a more clear roadmap that helps keep their students in Kansas and give them the paths to maintain a high school, high wage job here in our state. As you will see in this chart, and that's provided on your testimony or your package, Grace's parents had access to the best place to send their child for early childhood education. Because of this, Grace was most likely able to enter third grade on reading level. Grace and her family also had information on various high school paths that would lead to multiple options for her high school, high wage job here in Kansas, including training in CTE, college prep, or whatever was best for that particular child. Grace knew what classes she could take in high school to give her a running start for her career because she had the data of 80% of her peers that went before her to show what paths were the best to take. Grace had data to show the best path in her high school classes, her post-secondary training, and her degree completion needed for a career here in Kansas. And finally, Grace was aware of all the high school high-wage jobs because there was a connection between her education system and the open jobs in the workforce. You see, Grace's state of Kentucky prioritized a state longitudinal data system that would better align their education and workforce systems. They focused on ongoing governance. Go ahead. 2 more. There we go. 1 more. You're okay. They focused on the governance of the data itself, emphasizing privacy first and foremost, access, accountability, and engagement resources that not only benefited business, but also students, parents, teachers, lawmakers, and the business leaders who would be able to utilize the state longitudinal data. They utilized a cross-agency governance model to ensure that all of the data was available and useful for a variety of stakeholders. They were able to do this by creating a state statute that would govern and access this data. That state statute in Kentucky, and in fact about 22 other states around the country right now, including Missouri, which we have to beat, they are also creating these statutes in order to create transparency, trust, and collaboration between their government agencies, their school districts, their parents, and their business leaders, and it's working. In Kentucky, go ahead, they actually have a pretty friendly, one more, website that their constituents are able to access that has secured and de-identified data available for anyone willing and able to use it. The agency data is secured, de-identified, and utilized to answer workforce questions, job openings, and anything employers might need as well. What we've learned is that a state longitudinal data system creates a secure and permanent resource, not something that's, here and there. This secure permanent resource grants employers the ability to develop a clear picture of their future workforce. State government can measure and their return on investment for programs. Students can see the programs and the routes to success for which they are interested. Parents can identify pathways for their kids more easily and career opportunities. And finally, it will behoove educators as well who can discover the academics and experiences needed for their students and their success after graduation. I can go on, but I think you get the picture about how much good can come out of a system that's connected like this. Go ahead, a couple slides up. Okay, 1 more. 2 more. The good news is that this data already exists, and KSDE has piloted the process to connect the information between the agencies. Back in 2019, the Governor's Council on Education Subcommittee on Workforce Development did recommend the creation of a state longitudinal data system, and KSDE responded swiftly. I think the request was made in January. They did go ahead and go through a pretty strenuous planning process, and we're able to provide that data match by April of 2019. They created about 5 million rows of data that included connection of 10 years of data between PK-12, higher education, revenue, and labor, and higher education. The unfortunate reality is that, you could skip about 4, is that this one-time data linkage that they were able to do in 2019, those 5 million rows have not been analyzed or researched at all. They are sitting behind a firewall at KSDE because they don't have the capacity to build a functional database, number 1, or the capacity to do long-term research. In addition, my organization's had several conversations with KSDE about releasing this data via an MOU with a higher ed institution or something similar. And they're actually very concerned about releasing the data based on State Statute 726314. The strict provisions in that particular statute give the department pause when it comes to even using the de-identified data. and they're worried about privacy issues, essentially. At the end of the day, we know we can do it. We know that the data is useful and has behooved other states who are growing and maintaining a grow your own pipeline in Kansas. We need a prioritization of a state longitudinal data system, and we need to make sure that it's maintained and managed for output for years to come. Over the past year, we've been working with other states like Kentucky to utilize a system to make workforce decisions in a variety of cross-agency government models, and it's working, like I said before. We, as an organization, recommend and offer assistance in the creation of a standalone workforce research organization or a partnership between an existing state agency and a research university or organization to make sure that we can maximize the use of this data. The committee should also consider reviewing and/or revising Kansas State Statute 726314 to ensure that there is legal compliance with data sharing and research as needed. I want to thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
We're going to start with Senator Dietrich. First hand up, first question.
Thank you so much. We've heard you present this before, maybe not in this committee, but in others, so thank you so much for that. I know the issue with the statute, we've heard that, and I know there's a capacity issue, but what about the capacity at Department of Revenue and Department of Labor, your exchange? I mean, you know we've had some hiccups with just other pieces of data. Do you believe they have the capacity to be able to report this data and compile it, send it back, so we can do a longitudinal study?
Well, we know that they've already done it. So Commerce, Labor, Higher Ed, and KSDE have already been able to pull that data and match it. It's been done for about 10 years. What we don't know is who has the capacity. We are having conversations this afternoon within other agencies here in the State House to compile the data in a database, again, emphasizing security, and be able to research it. That part we are still trying to figure out.
You sure can.
So you talked about a memorandum of understanding maybe with higher ed. Do you think that is the door that we need to open to be able to do that research?
I think that's the quickest and would allow us to do research relatively fast, yes.
Ask who would prepare that memorandum of understanding? Is it KSDE, or is it the other agencies, or is it all of them?
I suspect, although we are working with legal counsel for all of the agencies right now, that the KSDE would need to prepare the MOU with a higher ed institution to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Tori, correct?
Correct.
Thank you for your presentation here. My question is, what all sources has this data been collected from? Public school districts? Is any of it from private entities? How exactly have we compiled all this information that's tied up here?
So KSDE purchased clearinghouse data, which I think would entail every school in Kansas for 10 years. I believe it was 2008 to 2018 to make this match, and they were able to match those records in a de-identified manner behind a firewall against labor and revenue. So it would be all schools.
Follow up? You can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at all of this, and some of the data points, like what was the last school district associated with that student, I do see the security concerns with this, because a lot of times, the questions that they'll ask you to recover a password would include what was your school mascot. So it would put certain things probably at a security risk if they were tied to an individual. So I do see the huge security concern, but why did we waste all the time and money in gathering this information with no end goal of what to do with it? Who decided that?
That is a good question. I would love the answer to myself. The businesses that I represent are asking that same question. I will throw you a bone. That was April of 2019. COVID was in there. I really couldn't answer that question, though.
Other questions? Yes. Chair, or Vice Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's made you chair.
No, thank you. That brought a question to mind. Do we know how much it has cost to gather all of this data from the various agencies? Is there a fiscal note?
Absolutely not. It was done kind of quietly. Like I said, it came out of the Governor's Council recommendations. I thought it would take a year. I mean, we've been fighting, and I have a team in Missouri doing the same thing, and they did it in 3 months between the agencies, including MOUs between them. So no fiscal note to my knowledge.
There has to be one somewhere. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll let legislative research kind of dig in on that. And do we have a draft copy, a template of the MOUs that Missouri's used?
I do have a statute, if we're interested in going that route, from Tennessee and Alabama who've recently done this. And yes, what actually happened in Missouri was the governor appropriated funds for a standalone data organization for the state.
Okay. Any other additional? Yes, Senator Dietrich. That's okay.
Thank you so much. I wonder if the revisers could tell us 726314, how long has that been on the books? Because that seems to be the obstruction here, right? That language?
Depends on who you ask, yes.
I mean, I've just heard that before, that is the issue, how that is interpreted.
Okay, reviser, we're asking you.
KSA 726314 was put on the books in 2014.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm trying to figure out what are we trying to accomplish and where do you fit in?
Absolutely. My organization represents the business community. So our employers here in the state of Kansas who are very intent on being involved and partnering with education to make sure that our kids understand where their high school high wage jobs are at and how they can get there. And this data solution would help provide a path for children or students to navigate a path into careers here in Kansas.
Seeing no further questions, thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you for having me.
Being with us. Committee, I want to draw your attention to a few things. You do have before you what was requested of the private not-for-profits as far as teacher education. So that is their chart on that. There was a follow-up from Matt with regard to, he indicated that Senator Straub, you had asked when he was here, how many public school students were going to our private not-for-profits and how many private students were going. And it's right at about 75% of the student enrollment in our private not-for-profits are coming from our public schools within the state of Kansas. Just under, I think it's about 23 or 24% are coming from private schools in the state of Kansas, and the others are coming from out of state. So that was the feedback that he provided. I am not seeing anything else. Committee, you do not usually typically see me take the phone. I apologize for the several interruptions, but we are trying to keep a 3-year-old child that's been with her foster parents from having to be turned over to the courts at 4 this afternoon. So it's very timely, and the courts have put, I guess, a gag order. If the family speaks to the media, they're fined $1,000. And they're not to speak to any of us. And I think several of you know that I've taught journalism for some time. And when we talk about journalism, we talk about the 4 states. And we talk about what is recourse for any citizens of the United States. And they have the option to to go to their legislature. They have the option to go through the judicial. They have the option of the executive branch. And when there is no resolution from there, their option is the media. And so for us to have a district judge that is saying, shame on you for talking to the executive branch, shame on you for going to the legislature, and by golly, don't you dare talk to the media, that is a dark day in the state of Kansas. So I apologize for the momentary distraction, but our meeting is adjourned.